Holy freaking Fazbears! It's time to review Five Nights at Freddy's. If you have not seen the film yet, though, I'm going to do a spoiler-free review first, and then I'll warn you before I get into the spoiler territory. Let's just get right on into it.
Well, sometimes that is better.
Before we review this film, of course, let's talk a little bit about it. Capping off our October horror releases is Five Nights at Freddy's from Blumhouse, the adaptation of the video game with the same name. The screenplay was written by franchise creator Scott Cawthon, as well as Seth Cuddeback and Emma Tammy, who is also the director of this film. Basic premise of the film is that it's about Mike Schmidt, a troubled security guard who accepts a nighttime job at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, a once successful but now abandoned family entertainment center where he discovers its 4 animatronic mascots: Freddy Fazbear, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, who kill anyone that is still there after midnight. This might be a bit of a spoiler, but I think it's hilarious how misleading that premise is, and we'll talk more about that in the spoiler section of this video. But first, non-spoiler review for our friends out there who haven't seen the film yet. This is gonna come off as harsh, but I'm genuinely at the point where I feel that Blumhouse has completely lost all of its credibility it once had. I remember back in my day, oh god, I'm getting old, when Blumhouse was like the shit, man. There was a time period, in my opinion, when Blumhouse movies were must-sees in the theaters. If it was the Insidious franchise, the Paranormal Activity franchise, the Sinister movies, the Purge movies, a lot of these were so good, and now I just feel like the majority of what the studio puts out is cash grab garbage. This, unfortunately, is just no different. I have heard that a lot of fans of the franchise really dig this movie, and as someone who has only played the original game, I just feel like they missed out on the biggest part of Five Nights at Freddy's, and that's the jump scares. There is one effective jump scare in this entire movie. On top of that, the main story at the center of this film is maybe just a little too dark to be this kid-oriented PG-13 horror film, which I get, once again, is very close to the source material, but just does not work for me at all. It's way too melodramatic and comes off as a soap opera. We're talking about a story that involves multiple dead kids, but at the same time, we're placed in a universe that is cartoonish and full-on Looney Tunes. These two things just do not work for me. It's the issue I have with Scream 3, but amplified times 1,000. And on top of that, this might be the most neurotic screenplay for a film I have ever seen. It did not need to do half of the things it did to get from point A to point B. We're stopping at fucking Avenue Q over here. And yes, that's a reference to another puppet-oriented thing out there. My musical theater friends will dig that. I'm just truly blown away by how much of a slam dunk this movie could have been in terms of success, and they just blew it by overcomplicating it. All this needed to be was a fun 90-minute little slasher flick with maybe a little bit of blood and gore, because you gotta keep that PG-13 rating. I get it. It's made for kids. If this was R-rated, no one would go to see it. And maybe you're someone like me who got dragged to Chuck E. Cheese as a kid, looked up at that giant mouse and thought at any point that thing is going to jump out at you and you're gonna poop your pants. I did poop myself at a Chuck E. Cheese. That's a true story. But I remember the fear that Charles Entertainment Cheese instilled within me during that day as a child when I fouled myself, and my god, this movie just did not capture any of that. If this was much more simpler and just about one guy who has this emotional and monetary connection to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and has to do the night shift there, this would have been a much better movie. As a big fan of just that original game, I'll admit I haven't played the other ones, but I loved that first one and it scared the heck out of me. This just didn't do that. This didn't capture that imagery that I have in my mind of what this franchise is. But the puppets and costumes, those were incredible. So what I will say is that if you're a fan of Five Nights at Freddy's, go see this. You might enjoy it. But if you're just looking for a cool PG-13 slasher, maybe to show the kids or take your girlfriend out to, I don't know, maybe skip this one. All right, we're getting into spoilers, ladies and gentlemen, so watch no further if you have not seen this movie yet, or you'll get it spoiled, and that would really fucking suck. So don't do that. Don't do that to yourself. Why? Why do that? Don't be a masochist. I mean, unless you're into that. We're not kink shaming around here. So I do want to talk about some positives regarding this movie real quick. First of all, Jim Henson's Creature Shop does all of the costumes for the animatronics in this movie. The practical side of this movie is gorgeous and done so well, and I wish more movies would do things like this. While yes, I understand practical effects are much harder, trust me, I know from experience, they just always look and turn out better. I also really enjoyed seeing both Matthew Lillard and Josh Hutcherson in a big movie like this. I wish Josh Hutcherson did more nowadays. Like, I know he's had a pretty good career and all that, but anytime he's the lead role in something, I feel like he always kills it. And even here, he does a pretty good job. He was on this Hulu show called Future Man that had an excellent first season, and I kind of lost interest during season 2, but he was really good in that. Once again, I just wish PETA did more. That's all. And Matthew Lillard, of course, Stu Macher himself, gives a weird performance in this movie, I gotta admit, but it was cool to see him as a horror villain once again. My biggest issue with this movie is it's just not written well. Like, there are entire plot points that don't need to happen. We get it. Josh Hutcherson's character has an emotional emotional and monetary connection to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. That's why he's got to be there for 5 nights. There's so much going on in this movie for no reason. This should have been a simple movie with the same setup. You could have done all of this, but instead of cutting back to this guy's dreams like 3 or 4 times to tell you, oh, his brother got taken away a long time ago and the fucking animatronic kids know about it, how about we don't do that and we just keep it a little more simple? We have one dream sequence that tells us all of that in one scene instead of flashing to it 3 times in completely unnecessary ways, showing us things we've already seen, and then just adding a little more to it every single time to, you know, once again, pad out the runtime here. How about instead of doing that, we focus on giving us some actually scary scenes with the animatronics? Because just like Willy's Wonderland, this movie has the exact same issue of having all of its big, like, kills and crazy scare sequences in just one little 5-minute sequence where a bunch of characters get killed. And that's really it. Like, the ending of the movie is like a little brutal, I guess, but not really. Once again, I get it's PG-13, but it has to be a horror movie still at the end of the day. Come on. We have a long sequence in this movie where the kid is playing with the animatronics and building a fort with them. Was that necessary? No, I don't remember that level in the game when we were building a fort with Chica and Bonnie and all that shit. What? I want to see these things trying to rip Josh Hutcherson's character apart, and that barely happens in this movie. While the animatronics all look really good, I think the biggest disappointment about all of them is that the majority of the kills come from this little tiny cupcake one. Now, before I saw the trailer for this movie, I didn't even really know about the cupcake character. I thought that was just like a background gag or whatever, but this thing is more vicious than the titular Freddy Fazbear. Freddy basically does nothing in this movie. At one point, Josh Hutcherson throws a bunch of water on the floor and electrocutes him, and he's like done for the majority of the third act pretty much after that. Could you imagine if in a Friday the 13th movie, we just knocked Jason out and he was like just done for the rest of the third act and comes back at the end for something? That would be a little disappointing, right? Well, Five Nights at Freddy's does that egregiously. I think they should have just made a movie called Attack of the Killer Cupcakes about a bunch of little guys running around with frosting on their heads. I'd watch it. I'm really not sure why the character of Vanessa had to be a police officer besides the fact that maybe she's a police officer in the actual story, but it doesn't work here at all. So Vanessa's a police officer. She gets stabbed at the end of this and she's in the hospital. No one gets blamed for this. She's also like in a coma and wasn't able to talk to anybody. And I'm assuming that Mike is the one that got her to the hospital because everyone else pretty much died, I should say, about Matthew Lillard's character. So like, did the cops just look the other way when Mike Schmidt just brought her to the hospital with a stab wound, or no? We're not going to explain what happened to the dead body in his living room either. Okay, cool. They're not going to find all of the bodies at the pizzeria either. This movie's trying so hard to pull like realistic things from the real world to make you relate to some of these characters, but then it can't even set its movie in the real world. You got to be able to do that with a movie like this or the horror's not going to connect. Like, I get a lot of this movie is supposed to be cartoonish and goofy, but not every facet to your movie has to be that. Like, you have to have some realism here, or how am I supposed to take any of this seriously? An episode of Happy Tree Friends has more realism to it than this movie. Even for a PG-13 horror movie, this is just really watered down. I would have just liked something horrifying in this movie. Not even really any of the jump scares landed for me, and this is a franchise birthed off of that. I didn't need gruesome, gory kills from Five Nights at Freddy's, but I did need some explosive jump scares. And like I said in my non-spoiler review, there's like maybe one that kind of got me, but even then, it's a crappy jump cut, and I hate it. Jump scares are so much more than the jump. I will argue this to my death. The buildup is the most important part of a jump scare, and this movie thinks, unfortunately, that it can just cut to black real quick and then bam, have something right in your face with a loud noise next to it. That's not a jump scare, that's cheap. A real jump scare is like that fucking one in Insidious that still haunts a lot of your nightmares. I know, because it haunts mine. I have pretty much no interest in any future Blumhouse movies. They are striking out left and right, putting out stinkers in some of my favorite horror franchises lately, and I just don't know. I can't get excited about anything else that they have in the future. I'm not even excited for Megan 2 anymore, and like, I loved that movie from January. In the last 12 months of releases from them, that is like the one film that wasn't a massive disappointment in my opinion. I'm not like completely shocked that this movie was bad. I mean, they've been trying to make it since 2015 and it's had unbelievable production issues, which I covered in a video that might pop up here somewhere. Even with my very little knowledge of this franchise though, I just don't feel like this is a good adaptation. Am I wrong? Like, do people really like this? I don't know. Hardly any jump scares. The animatronics rarely pose a threat. There's a bunch of other crazy drama going on that I know was not happening in that first game. Have I just gotten old? Is the new generation eluding me now? I don't know, but this was just not good. The animatronics were really cool, and I got to see some underrated actors in this flick, so that was pretty cool. I guess I'll give Five Nights at Freddy's like a 3 out of 10, because everything else was pretty bad. The MatPat cameo was pretty cool, but wow, that line was shoehorned, and you know what I'm talking about. What did you guys think of the Five Nights at Freddy's movies, and how are you feeling about Blumhouse as a studio lately? Leave me something about it in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching this brand new review video for Five Nights at Freddy's. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more horror content in the future. Please consider supporting me on Patreon by clicking that link in the description below, and as always, don't forget to kill it out there, y'all.